las agencias de inteligencia de Estados Unidos durante unos 20 años en varios puestos, incluido el subsecretario de Defensa para Inteligencia en las administraciones de Bill Clinton y George W. Bush. Ese es el tercer puesto de inteligencia más alto del Pentágono, según lo que sé. También fue durante años director personal del Comité Selecto de Inteligencia del Senado de Estados Unidos. Antes de entrar a esta rueda de prensa, quería decir algunas cosas de organización. Esta rueda de prensa durará no más de 60 minutos. Las preguntas y las respuestas se interpretarán de forma consecutiva, lo que lleva un cierto tiempo, por lo que les pido que sean lo más breves posible. ¿Quién quiere hacer una pregunta? Levante la mano y les llamaré. Antes de formular su pregunta, indique por favor su nombre y la organización con la cual trabaja. Y empezaremos con una pregunta por persona y luego, si tenemos bastante tiempo, podremos aceptar más preguntas. Como he dicho antes, hay un hombre sentado aquí a mi lado que potencialmente sabe mucho más sobre los ovnis que todos nosotros juntos, y con eso me gustaría invitarle a hacerse sus preguntas. ¿Quién quiere preguntar? José.
Hola, mi nombre es Josep Guijarro, represento a Onda Cero Radio, y mi pregunta para el señor Mellon es que recientemente en un artículo que usted publicó hablaba de que es posible que próximamente funcionarios de la administración desvelaran la existencia de recuperación de restos de un objeto estrellado y la tecnología inversa. ¿Está sugiriendo usted que estamos cercanos de admitir la existencia de seres de otros mundos en nuestro planeta?
So in an article recently published, you mentioned that it was possible and it is of a great interest to for the state, some of the state functionaries, that it was of a big interest to retrieve UAP objects that has crashed, and that this UAP used inverse technology. Do you think that this inverse technology was really in the object, and is this the main interest of retrieving the item?
Okay, thank you for the question. Obviously, that's a topic everybody's excited about, right? Let me say a couple things at the outset. First of all, I need everybody to understand that I'm only speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the Galileo Project, which I work with. I'm not speaking for the Scientific Coalition of Ufology. I'm not speaking for any of the government organizations that I sometimes work with. It's purely my own views. If I understand your question correctly, in my article, what I said was that Congress is putting in place a procedure, our government, that will grant amnesty to people that have information about that topic. There have been long-standing allegations that our government has recovered some crashed alien material. And so our government, the great exciting thing is that we should get to the bottom of that soon, because there's going to be a legal mechanism by which government officials, military people, and others who may be laboring under legal restrictions will actually be able to come forward without fear of arrest or prosecution to talk about that or other programs that have not been briefed to Congress or released to the American people or the public. So,
lo que está diciendo en primer lugar, que él está hablando, pues dando su opinión personal, no está hablando en nombre del proyecto Galileo u otros proyectos de los que forma parte. Para él, el punto importante es que el Senado, el Congreso va a va a proporcionar amnistía, protección a todos aquellos que están interesados en recuperar este material que puede proveer de los extraterrestres. Y esto es un hecho bastante bueno, porque de esta manera esto acciona mecanismos legales para los oficiales que realmente están interesados en estos temas, y también los militares, aquellos que estén intentando recuperar este material, tendrán seguridad y tendrán protección, de manera que sí van a poder arriesgarse, van a poder tomar un paso más para poder recuperar este material y poder con total confianza investigar un poco más en el tema sin tabús ni restricciones.
Is that responsive to your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yes?
Yeah, Mr. Mellon,
My question.
Thank you.
your
Because
knowledge
that's the
of
question.
the
Ask the
Pentagon?
question.
Al, can you put the mic on?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mellon, to your knowledge, does the Pentagon has access to any exotic materials that may be of interest?
Señor Mellon, ¿usted cree que el Pentágono tiene acceso a información que podría ser de interés general para que se sepa?
There are people that make that claim, and there are people that the Congress is putting this procedure in place because they have reason to believe that may in fact be the case. As hard as that is to believe, as mind-boggling as that is to believe, they didn't do this on a whim, right? This is an extraordinary thing to get members of Congress to embrace such a radical notion, right? There's been incredible change in the last few years on Capitol Hill. When I got involved in this issue in 2017, there had essentially been no change publicly since 1970 and the end of Project Blue Book. We were stuck in a do loop, and there were allegations and nothing was changing. There was no progress, no resolution. So the really great, exciting news today is that, one, the Congress is engaged. They're putting this legislation in place. It hasn't passed, but it is in bills in both houses of Congress. In the committee bills going to the floor, it's almost certain to pass. Meanwhile, the military and the Defense Department have been directed and are embracing the mission to begin using the vast apparatus of the Defense Department for the first time ever to try to seek answers to this question. And I've written about those capabilities. I've some things on my website that at a public unclassified level give the public some sense, some notion of how incredible some of these capabilities are. If you don't know what the space fence is, if you don't know what our ballistic missile defense system is, and the power, we have systems that can see a tennis ball 20,000 miles away in orbit. Right, so now those incredible capabilities are being used to begin to try to answer this question. So that's the really exciting thing.
I have a question. She's contract.
Lo que está diciendo es que el Congreso, el Senado puede pensar que realmente es así, que hay información que el Pentágono quizá no quería revelar, pero que no queda otra posibilidad. Puede ser que este sea el caso, puede ser que lo estén haciendo conscientemente a propósito. En 2000, por ejemplo, desde el 2017 no seguía sin haber progreso. Desde 1970 es un plazo de periodo de tiempo bastante largo que el tema estuvo estancado, no había ningún progreso, ninguna ninguna acción por parte del Senado, y el hecho que este tema esté tan candente ahora es muy emocionante, primero porque estamos viendo que el Senado se está involucrando también legalmente en el tema, y están viendo progreso sobre el tema, en el sentido de que ahora pueden hablar un poquito más, pueden revelar más cosas, y también en cuanto a las fuerzas militares y de la defensa que ahora pueden usar estos recursos que tienen desde por la primera vez desde hace tanto tiempo. Y también él escribió sobre este tema una nota, un artículo en su página web, donde revelaba algún material considerado como clasificado, pero para que el público general también tenga acceso, porque cree que es importante, puesto que es la primera vez que el público tiene acceso a esta información y a materiales como por ejemplo los misiles balísticos o tecnología similar. Y también que es el momento, gracias a eso, de que por fin podamos empezar a responder algunas preguntas que hasta ahora parecía que no tenían respuesta.
If I could follow up, I think this will be of general interest, if I could follow on to that briefly. There are people that I know, I've been working this for many years now, and interacted with many people in the Defense Department, political people, senators, former secretaries of defense, scientists, generals. There are some people who are trustworthy, who have the appropriate credentials and access, have told me that this is true, and have told me that they are going to, or they're considering coming forward once this legislation's passed. But I want to also add something else, and this is important because the UFO community doesn't generally hear the other side of the story. And that is, for every one of those people, there are also another probably 4 or 5 or 10 people that are very, very senior who told me it's not true, right? Former secretaries of defense, Air Force generals, and others. So I think we all need to be patient and give the system a chance to work. And it should, I believe it will.
Dice que hay personas, hay perfiles como políticos, senadores, científicos y personas en general de confianza que dicen que saben que esto es verdadero, esto que está diciendo, y dice que tienen muchas ganas de que finalmente que están dispuestos a hablar más del tema, a dar un paso adelante una vez que se apruebe esta legislación que daría amnistía a aquellos interesados en el tema. Y generalmente las personas interesadas en la ufología no tienen este tipo de conocimiento y les faltan también información, así como dice que hay personas que consideran que esto no es cierto, que no creen en esto lo que él está comentando, como por ejemplo pueden ser algunos ex senadores o personas de otros que ocupaban altos cargos.
Sí, y hay que conceder el tiempo para que el sistema pueda...
Hay que dar el tiempo para que el sistema pueda aprobar la legislación que daría amnistía a aquellas personas que están interesadas en recuperar este posible objeto OVNI, UFO, extraterrestre. Están esperando con muchas ganas porque tienen ganas de poder hablar de cosas que finalmente no podrían por las restricciones y los límites.
Creo que usted primero. Sí.
Alfonso Trinidad, de Radio 4 Radio Nacional. A mí me gustaría preguntar algo más relacionado con las convicciones personales de Christopher. Una entrevista reciente hablaba de que creía que estos objetos carecían de sistemas de propulsión. ¿En qué se basa para decir esto? ¿Cuál es su idea? ¿Y qué campo abre esa suposición? ¿De qué estamos entonces?
The statement that UFOs do not have propulsion systems, and what do you think this can involve?
The statement that UFOs do not have propulsion systems?
Maybe visible propulsion systems, I think. Visible, there's no propeller, there's no exhaust. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I understand the question. There are, mountains of evidence of, in Imminent's case, for example, we have seen and photographed and tracked vehicles for decades that have no exhaust, they have no air intake, they have no control surfaces, they have no visible means of propulsion, they have no wings. I mean, this is one of the interesting things about this phenomenon to me, is that if we imagine whether probes from some other civilization might be visiting our planet, we would expect them to be so radically different that they would appear to be like magic. Right? And that's kind of what we see. So yes, we absolutely do see objects that are doing things we don't understand, we can't explain. There's no question about that. No question.
Thank you. The first two questions were addressing the July 2022, when Representative Mike Gallagher, Republican congressman from Wisconsin's 8th district, introduced that amendment that would go to the fiscal year 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, and that it could give or would give government employers and contractors immunity from reprisal, this is quotes, for coming forward about UFO encounters and programs. And what I'm wondering is, this is now at the end of the first week in September, and I think if this is going to be enacted, it would have to be in this October, in the next month. And I wondered if you could give us some update on what happens in October, and if it doesn't pass, what would transpire.
So the legislation funds the U.S. military. So there is a strong incentive to get it passed every year. It's kind of a, that the funding has to continue somehow. But it's also a bill that has so many billions of dollars. It's around $800 billion. And many, many individual programs and different amendments. That legislation has to pass the House, it has to go to conference with the Senate, has to then be passed in the identical form by both houses and go to the president for signature. Typically what happens is it gets late into the fall, and there are so many amendments being offered to that bill because there's so much money that they can't get it actually passed until they get pressed up against Thanksgiving vacation or Christmas vacation. Right. That's the reality.
Right.
So probably by the end of the fall, by the end of the year.
Christmas.
Could be by Christmas. It should happen, but sometimes what they do is extraneous forces, sometimes for political reasons, they can't get it done. And what they do then is they have a short-term extension of the current budget. So that's a possibility as well. Most likely, it will be enacted by the end of the year or early next year.
Do you think it would have?
So
Wait, let her translate.
Yeah.
Lo que Linda estaba preguntando tiene que ver con esta legislación que empezó a prepararse en julio de este año por el senador Mike Gallagher, que daría amnistía, protección a aquellos que están intentando investigar más sobre el tema, aquellos funcionarios del gobierno. Ella lo que quería saber era, estamos a septiembre del 2022, ¿qué pasaría si esta ley finalmente no se aprobaría en octubre? ¿Cuándo podríamos esperar que pase? ¿O qué pasaría si esta ley finalmente no se aprueba? A lo que el señor Mellon respondió que para preparar esta ley hay mucho dinero en juego, mucho dinero envuelto, 8.000 millones de dólares de presupuesto, hay mucho en juego también hasta que la ley finalmente llegue a su tramo final, es decir, reciba la firma del presidente de los Estados Unidos, tiene que pasar por muchas etapas, así como también tendrá que ser modificada en muchas maneras antes de que finalmente pueda aprobarse, y entre esta y otras razones políticas se piensa que para el final del año, de este año, por la época de Navidad, podamos tener más información y pueda finalmente ser gestionada.
Let me,
If I could just
if I may add a little bit. There's also legislation in the Senate side. So similar legislation in the Senate. It's almost certain to pass, almost guaranteed to pass, because there is support in both parties, in both houses. And it's already in the bills that are going to the floor. So it'll, it could be November, it could be January, but it is almost certain to happen in the months ahead.
Just a quick follow-up.
But
If-
let her translate it.
Oh.
Sorry, Linda, we cannot. Let's do that in another round, the follow-up, because we also have other people who want to ask something.
Well,
Rápidamente, la legislación está en el Senado y es una ley que es casi seguro que se va a aprobar. Si no puede ser este año, en noviembre, diciembre, será seguramente para enero del 2023, pero el señor Mellon tiene la certeza de que es muy probable que esta ley finalmente se apruebe.
¿Cómo se llama esta ley?
Could you repeat the name of the legislation?
So there's the language in the Defense Authorization Act, also in the Intelligence Authorization Act. So there is support in the armed services and intelligence committees in both houses of Congress for this. Strong support. And there's no opposition in the Congress to it. So it's almost certain to happen in the months ahead.
Se le llama la ley de la autorización de la defensa o la ley de la autorización legal. Dicen que dice el señor Mellon que es una ley de gran interés para todos y que es muy probable que en los meses que siguen tengamos alguna noticia o que incluso se llegue a aprobar.
So if this whistleblower act passes, part of that bill, do you expect people like Elizondo to come forward and blow the whole thing open? And also, what makes you so passionate about this subject? So it's a little two-part.
Okay. One, I can't speak for Lou, but I don't think Lou is going to be one of the people
Okay.
who is going to be coming forward. I don't believe that Lou worked directly on any alien recovery program.
Okay.
Could be wrong, but I don't believe that's the case. I know Lou very well.
Okay.
We work closely together. But there are other people. Why am I passionate?
Yes.
Two things. One, I've been interested in this since I was 7 years old. And I saw a video of that had been taken by a member of the community, was showed to our entire school, of a massive UFO in broad daylight, sailing through the clouds, came in broad, beautiful day, blue sky, and it was sailing along. It came and it banked and it went into a cloud and it disappeared and then it came out the other side. So I started reading all of the books that I could and all that, put a hook in me. But the other thing is, and the thing that got me involved publicly, is that in 2017, early 2017, late 2016, I was doing some consulting for the Office of Naval Intelligence, and I met Lou in the Pentagon and some others, and I became aware that our fighter pilots were encountering these things on a regular, weekly, almost daily basis in over training ranges in the ocean, and nobody was doing anything about it. It wasn't being reported to up the chain. The Secretary of Defense didn't know, the Congress didn't know. Everybody was afraid to talk about it, and the fighter pilots were having near mid-air collisions.
Wow.
It was so prevalent. They were putting warning notices at the bases for the fighter pilots, saying, "Be aware that these things are out there, and we're seeing them so often. There's a potential to actually, have a crash." And so when I learned that I just said, that's not acceptable. I'm going to do whatever I can. And that's when I really got involved, trying to first get to the Secretary of Defense, then going to the New York Times and the Congress.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
La pregunta era qué es lo que le apasiona tanto al señor Mellon sobre todo este tema. Empezó a contar como empezó a interesarse en este tema desde los 7 años, cuando un profesor estaba en el colegio y pasaron un vídeo sobre un avistamiento de un ovni en plena luz del día. Podía ver el señor joven Mellon podía ver cómo el ovni desaparecía en las nubes y luego volvía a resurgir, y es un tema que le marcó mucho. Después de ese vídeo que le impactó tanto, leyó muchísimos libros sobre el tema para informarse más, para aprender más sobre el tema, y cuando empezó a involucrarse públicamente en el tema fue a finales del 2016, principios del 2017, cuando ingresó cuando formaba parte de la inteligencia naval de los Estados Unidos, que tenía compañeros que estaban investigando sobre el tema y estaban informando de muchos avistamientos de ovnis, y él lo consultaba con sus compañeros, pero veía que nadie estaba haciendo ninguna acción al respecto para investigar un poco más en la materia, y que también cuando lo reportaba a sus superiores tampoco había nadie que hiciese ninguna acción al respecto, hasta el punto de que los pilotos que estaban haciendo maniobras de pruebas de la inteligencia naval tuvieron que poner señales en el campo de pruebas que decían cuidado con los ovnis, y cuidado, peligro de estrellamiento con los ovnis. Y viendo que no se estaba haciendo nada al respecto para escalar un poco el tema, acudió al New York Times.
11 near-mid-air collisions.
Wow.
So there's a safety issue as well as a broader national security issue. Who's flying around our country? That why are they there? Who are they? What are they doing snooping around our military bases?
Well,
And then, of course, there's the larger scientific, cosmic question.
when you say who, we can take a guess, because that's another question, okay?
Y para terminar, quería añadir que en un informe que pasó por el Congreso en junio del 2021, se reportaron 11 casi colisiones provocadas entre los ovnis y los aviones de entrenamiento, y era un tema muy importante porque ponía en riesgo tanto la seguridad nacional como temas también militares, en cuanto a temas legales militares, y también, por supuesto, levantaba la pregunta que relacionada con la ufología: ¿quién realmente era el que estaba pilotando esas naves? ¿Quién había detrás? ¿Cómo podríamos saberlo?
Cristina.
¿Qué repercusiones geopolíticas va a tener la aprobación de esta legislación, que podría llevar al reconocimiento por parte de Estados Unidos de la visita constante de seres extraterrestres? La Guerra Fría fue caracterizada por el silencio. Rusia y Estados Unidos mantenían el secreto, el silencio, para hacerse con esa tecnología. Pero si ahora se reconoce por parte de un gobierno, esto va a provocar una revolución, un maremoto geopolítico. Usted, como agente de inteligencia, habrá reflexionado muchísimo sobre las posibles consecuencias de este reconocimiento. ¿Qué puede compartir con nosotros?
She's asking what geopolitical repercussions can this legislation being passed can have, and what implication does it have if the government of the United States of America recognizes that there is indeed presence of aliens. And she also adds that during Cold War, the trend was to remain silent and to keep everything in secrecy. And now, if this act is passed, she is wondering that if this is recognized, if this sort of information is recognized, what will happen? Is this going to create a new trend for everything to go public and be classified?
Other nations.
Yeah. Great question. Two things I need to say about that. First of all, the legislation doesn't ensure that the information will go public. So it will go to Congress, it will go to the Advanced Airborne Reconnaissance Office, the Anomalous Airborne Reconnaissance Office, which is going to be getting a new name after this year's legislation passes. They're changing the name again to the Joint Aerospace Undersea Program Office. But it's important to bear in mind that it will not necessarily become immediately public information. It could still be behind. Congress handles a lot of classified information and keeps a lot of information secret. So they'll have to make a decision at that point in the White House. That's the first point.
El primer punto, dice que es una pregunta muy buena, y el primer punto en el cual quiere enfatizar es que no necesariamente esta información estará disponible para un público general, sino que esta información estará disponible de momento solamente para los miembros del Congreso, y si esta legislación finalmente se aprueba, se creará una nueva oficina de investigación de este tipo de fenómenos de información, llamada el Departamento de un aeroespacio conjunto bajo el mar submarino.
I need to respond to the second part of your question. Two things. One, fabulous question. I like to be optimistic. My hope is that if this is true, that the information will become public. The world we live in today, and this is, there are people that are frightened of the extraterrestrial question, but is that more frightening than the fact that we live in a world in which nuclear escalation is increasing, nuclear weapons are proliferating, global warming is happening, artificial intelligence is not under any kind of control, biotechnology is expanding out of control. The consequence is that we need unprecedented collaboration and cooperation of nations all over the world. And I think the most optimistic scenario would be is that this might cause the nations of the world to view one another differently and collaborate in ways they haven't before. So that is, if this goes public and there's no change in behavior, they continue to be these furtive sightings, but everybody realizes, oh my gosh, somebody else is here, we're being watched, we don't know what their agenda is, that could be a level of shock and reframing of how we think about ourselves as a species and our planet, that I would like to think it might have a very positive effect in enhancing collaboration and reducing conflict between countries. That would be my hope.
Sí, respondiendo a la segunda parte de tu pregunta, lo que está diciendo el señor Mellon es que si esta información finalmente pasa a estar a disposición de un público general, esto crearía una especie de shock entre la población, porque generalmente se tenía la impresión de que todo este fenómeno de los ovnis, algunas personas estaban un poco asustadas por ello. Entonces lo que está diciendo el señor Mellon es que si esta información se hace pública, habrá un shock a nivel mundial que él cree que puede tener un efecto positivo, porque de esta manera creará un espíritu de cooperación y de colaboración en
personas que ya me han levantado la mano, Sonia, Clas, José y
Marina.
Primero Sonia.
Hi, Sonia from codigo.com. I've been speaking to some researchers here, and they are all kind of wondering what I try to convey here, which is with all the information that has been disclosed recently, have you or any of the people you normally work with, such as Lou, faced any legal repercussions, or did you have any NDAs regarding that? And on the other hand, we would also like to ask, because you made some statements back in 2016 in an interview with Leslie Keane, where you said that after examining all the DoD's black programs, you didn't find any convincing evidence that they were kind of occulting any UFO information. But recently, it feels like you've changed that point of view. So what happened? Perhaps you learned something that made you change your mind.
Good questions. I do know people. Oh, okay, sure.
Lo que ella quiere saber, en primer lugar, si con toda esta información de que se ha estado hablando, si habrán algunas repercusiones a nivel legal y si, por ejemplo, se han puesto en marcha contratos de confidencialidad que tienen que ver con esta legislación. Y la segunda parte de la pregunta le preguntaba al señor Mellon si ha tenido alguna novedad, alguna noticia que le ha hecho cambiar su punto de vista desde un artículo que publicó que no hubo suficientes pruebas convincentes de la existencia de los ovnis, y un artículo posterior lo describía de otra manera, y lo que ella quería saber es si ha habido algún suceso o ha tenido alguna información adicional que le ha hecho cambiar de parecer.
Okay, so there's first of all, the legal repercussions. It's a very serious, a real issue. It's so serious I can't answer your question fully because there are it's a very real issue for people I know, and I can't get any detail about it. That's how serious it is. Secondly, your other question is that yes, my views have changed. So when I worked in the Defense Department, there's a structure for monitoring all of the black programs to make sure the Army and Navy and Air Force and DARPAs that are not duplicating, so that the Secretary of Defense has control over all those programs that are spread around. At that time, I participated in the review of those programs, and there was nothing related to UFOs. But there's not enough time to explain how complicated our system is of secrets, but one of the things you have to understand is that we have 3 galaxies of secrets, and I was very deep in 2 of them, but not in the 3rd. We have the intelligence community, which has its own whole world of secrets. We have the Defense Department, which has hundreds of programs that the intelligence community doesn't know about, and largely vice versa. Then we have the Department of Energy, which has tens of billions of dollars of black programs, and there's some intersect. But since I left the government, I have learned new things and new information that have raised a question as to whether there wasn't something outside of that system that was so special, so super secret, that was kept out of that whole process. And so that's one of the questions, and that's one of the reasons Congress is taking the action that it is.
Great.
En cuanto a la parte legal, repercusiones legales, dice que es un tema muy serio y muy importante para las personas, y que son tan importantes que desafortunadamente no puede proporcionar más detalles al respecto. Y en cuanto al cambio de su punto de vista, cuando trabajaba en el Departamento de Defensa tenía acceso a varios programas de monitoreo de información, y tanto de la Fuerza Naval, Aérea como Terrestre, y su primer punto de vista de no tener suficientes pruebas concluyentes para demostrar la existencia de los ovnis eran porque entre las 3 fuerzas, aérea, naval y terrestre, no habrían encontrado pruebas concluyentes de la existencia de estos ovnis. Por eso su primer punto de vista. Sin embargo, después, cuando él trabajaba aún con el gobierno, para él existen 3 tipos de galaxias de secretos, como él le gusta llamarlo. Está la galaxia de la inteligencia, que alberga muchísimos secretos, la galaxia del Departamento de Defensa, que tiene cientos de programas diferentes, Y luego también está el de la galaxia, el departamento de energía, que también alberga muchos programas diferentes. Entonces, desde que dejó de trabajar directamente con el gobierno de Estados Unidos, ha aprendido muchas cosas nuevas que en aquel momento no estaba al tanto, y eso es lo que le ha hecho pensar que este nuevo flujo de información es tan especial, por eso el cambio de creencia y de mentalidad.
Yes, I don't know the precise figure, but I'm assuming the United States of America is maybe a tenth of the land mass, the non-water land in the world, something like that, maybe a tenth or less. Yeah, and Russia perhaps is a fifth or something like that. It's much bigger than we are. We can assume that if there have been countless reports and radar detections and encounters and here and even recovery of, perhaps if that's true, of material in the United States, that the same thing has happened all over the world. I think it's hard to imagine that the UFOs are only visiting us. And if they crash, they'll crash wherever they crash. Certainly they've been detected everywhere. Okay, I'm sorry, yeah, the question is, first of all, is there any benefit politically for the country that or is there any loss for the country that first declares that they are studying UFOs? And the second is, besides the United States, Russia, and China, if a country like Peru or Chile, who have been more open, what is keeping them from coming full out and saying this is what we have? Are they influenced by their respective sphere of influence, like the United States or Russia or China? Okay, thank you. Long questions.
We stick to one question each because we don't have a lot of time left.
Lo que está preguntando pasa directamente a la pregunta. Quiere saber qué tipo de, qué es lo que le beneficiaría, en qué manera le beneficiaría a los Estados Unidos que esta ley de amnistía para los funcionarios finalmente se aprobase, y así como las grandes potencias como pueden ser Estados Unidos o Rusia, si ellos pueden admitir avistamientos de ovnis, porque por ejemplo países mucho más pequeños como por ejemplo el Perú debe guardar el silencio y no poder revelar nada de sus avistamientos, o es que acaso en Perú, en territorios más pequeños, no están pasando.
So clearly it's a global phenomenon, no question, and we see that in civilian reports from around the world, and other countries. The French have had an official government office for decades that's been studying the UAP phenomenon. So, and we're obviously very overtly doing it now. The fact that we're open about that, I don't know that brings much advantage. If your question was simply, is there an advantage to saying, to be the first ones to admit you're studying it?
No. Not that you admit you're studying it, but that you found this.
Oh, okay.
And that that they're real.
Yeah, so one of the things that we don't know is, and first of all, it might not be a crash, right? There are different versions of these stories and different flavors. And one of them is that something was just left like a gift. Something just landed. That's a story. It's not, I'm not saying that's true. That's one version of the story. I think if we imagine for a moment that a country has recovered something like that, the military people, their natural desire is going to be to exploit it for their unique advantage, right?
Absolutely. Rather
than probably going public with it. But as I said earlier, I think we're at a point where conflict, the trends in international relations are so negative with Russia and the Ukraine and China and the South China Sea and Taiwan, not to mention global warming and so many other things, that something that shocks and jolts the system and our entire species, and causes us to think about our planet differently and ourselves, might have a tremendous beneficial effect. That would be my hope. And maybe that's because I've been involved in trying to bring this out, so I'm actually wanting to think this is going to be for the better, if that proves to be the case.
El hecho de, el señor Mellon está diciendo que este avistamiento de ovnis es un fenómeno global, que hay informes de civiles y se ha admitido, por ejemplo, que Francia está estudiando el fenómeno de los UAP, de los ovnis, y que los Estados Unidos de América están ahora admitiéndolo más abiertamente, quizá no públicamente, pero más a puertas abiertas, que quizá este fenómeno que se quiere estudiar no ha sido realmente una nave espacial estrellándose contra la Tierra, sino que también puede ser una versión de ellas, es que puede ser como un regalo, que simplemente esta nave espacial aterrizó en la Tierra y fue dejada ahí como un regalo para que nosotros lo encontremos. Pero considera que sería beneficioso que este descubrimiento, que este fenómeno se haga, digamos, pueda tener más personas acceso a esta información, puede ser positivo para equilibrar este patrón negativo que últimamente está rodeando tanto el mundo como los Estados Unidos, como por ejemplo estamos viendo con las relaciones con Rusia, con China, el calentamiento global o el conflicto bélico en Ucrania. Entonces considera que tener acceso a esta información puede ser un equilibrio entre el patrón, la tendencia negativa y la positiva.
Ms. Mellon, in the UFO community, we have thousands of reports from abductees and experiencers such as me of not only UFO sightings or ET abductions, but also military abductions or programs. So my question to you is, are you aware of any of these programs being taken, actually performed by U.S. Army or officials, or do you personally believe that they're going to come to the public and reveal this information?
Lo que está preguntando es que ella está al tanto de que hay muchos ataques, muchas abducciones que no se están haciendo y experiencias que no están ocurriendo solamente por parte de los ovnis, de los UAPs, sino que también se están produciendo lo que ella llama las abducciones militares. Entonces le está preguntando al señor Mellon si él está al tanto de que esto está pasando, o si ha recibido información o ha oído si realmente este tipo de abducciones pueden estar pasando.
Okay, a couple things. One, my role in this, it is so hard to get people in the government to even consider the possibility that UFOs are real, that UAPs are real. I didn't want to go anywhere near the abduction phenomenon. I faced the challenge of senators, congressmen, editors from major newspapers, trying to get them to take that issue seriously. That was a huge challenge to begin with. If we had tried from the outset to include abductions and that sort of thing, I don't know that we'd be where we are today with the progress that we've made. I hope that whatever else is involved in this phenomenon comes to light. And that's a fascinating phenomenon. I have a friend who is a career CIA person who had an incredible experience along the lines of what you're discussing, but it did not involve our military. We have military personnel who've had reported some, on occasion, some amazing, crazy experiences. I have no knowledge or information of our military being involved in trying to any kind of abduction activity.
Thank you.
dice que es desde el papel que él desempeña, dice que ya le cuesta muchísimo trabajo convencer a las personas del gobierno de que tanto los ovnis como los UAPs son reales y que realmente existen, por no hablar ya de las abducciones, las cuales cuando menciona el tema, el gobierno no se toma muy seriamente, y probablemente si indagas un poco más con el tema de las abducciones en el gobierno, probablemente no estaría donde está ahora.
I would be amazed if that proved to be the case, that our military was involved with that kind of thing. I've seen some reports from people who claimed that they were abducted and they got onto a craft and they saw military personnel there.
Yes.
Secret space program.
I've heard of that kind of thing, but I've read about that kind of thing, but I have never encountered anybody in the military that has never had any suggestion that, even with the Air Force people, interestingly, the Air Force people are still incredulous that this is even a real issue. I mean, they are still extremely resistant to even talking about this or getting involved in any way, shape, or form, much less, just with the generic phenomenon. And so, I don't know anything about that, and I'd be amazed if that was the case, but it's all about the data. Wherever the trail, we just got to follow the trail wherever it goes.
Thank you.
Y también estaba diciendo que tiene un amigo en la CIA que experimentó una experiencia cercana a lo que está lo de la pregunta, y dice que en el departamento donde trabajaba no tuvo nunca ningún informe, ningún militar que hubiese estado cerca o que hubiese podido ser abducido, que no tiene información de que hubiese pasado anteriormente. Dice que en el caso de que pasara alguna vez o que alguien, un militar admitiese que le ha pasado, dice que sería bastante emocionante. Sin embargo, dice que él sabe el tema porque leyó, se informó sobre la materia, pero que nunca ha oído de los militares con los que trabajaba, que alguno de ellos hubiese experimentado esto personalmente. También está diciendo que, sobre todo en los militares de las fuerzas aéreas, son bastante incrédulos, les cuesta mucho de creer que estos fenómenos estén ocurriendo.
Nos quedan solo 7 minutos, entonces creo que
mi pregunta es muy sencilla y tiene que ver con su papel dentro del mundo de la inteligencia.
Intelligence, and he said that what if the UAP are really weapons sent by Russia or China, and what if the US is making a terrible mistake by showing their weaknesses and acknowledging this?
So, very interesting question. The report to Congress from the Defense Department, the first unclassified report, stated, we see no evidence that any of these are Russian or Chinese. And that's not surprising because they're unidentified, right? They're all unidentified, but they're not seeing any indication that Russia or China has some technology beyond anything that we possess.
Right.
So when we're seeing things that are, like in the Nimitz case with the Tic Tac there, that was engaged in instantaneous acceleration and extreme altitude, we have no reason to believe that any other country has that kind of technology. Having said that, they also said, and I agree with this as well, that we're seeing a range of phenomena. So in some cases, we have Navy ships, for example, that are being swarmed by small lights, which could be an advanced drone. And that's probably more likely than an extraterrestrial vehicle, you know, some kind of Chinese secret drone or something, entirely possible. Some of those may be. We have, in other countries, any country that's engaged in modern military warfare is confronting a huge new challenge they're not well prepared for when it comes to drones and unmanned vehicles. If you look at the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Azerbaijanis won that conflict decisively quickly, largely because of drones they got from Turkey. You can see the role that drones are playing in the Ukraine, in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And most conventional defensive systems were geared towards detecting aircraft and missiles, right? So these new, smaller, low radar cross-section objects are a big challenge for our military and other militaries. So I don't think it's exposing any weakness that we were not aware of or that others were not aware of. Actually, if I could add one thing, I think the really important thing is if Lou and I hadn't done what we've done, those things might still be flying around. Now we're starting to look and do something about it to protect our country. You know, that was our first motivation. So I think we're much better off because that information came out. Now we're taking steps to correct it and find out. Before that, we were just pretending that it wasn't happening. So I think we're much better off.
En los informes que han pasado al Congreso dice que no tienen pruebas de que estos de que esto este fenómeno pueda ser no hay pruebas de que hayan sido armas enviadas por China o por Rusia. Tampoco tenemos información de que realmente o evidencia o pruebas de que sea una amenaza enviada por estos países y dice que tampoco no tenemos ninguna razón para creer que algún país aparte de China o Rusia tenga acceso a este tipo de tecnología. También está diciendo después que por otro lado hubo avistamientos de los barcos de la Marina de Estados Unidos siendo rodeados por un enjambre de lo que parecían luces que podrían ser drones, según él. Y aquí le gustaría incidir en el tema de los drones, porque dicen que, por ejemplo, el conflicto bélico de Azerbaiyán están tomando mucha ventaja gracias a drones obtenidos de Turquía. Y, por ejemplo, habla sobre el papel y la importancia de los drones que se están utilizando en el conflicto bélico en Ucrania. Dice que incide sobre los drones porque dicen que pueden pasar por debajo de muchos radares y no ser tan evidentes ni tan vistosos. Entonces dice que para ellos, al contrario, no creen que esto puedan sacar ventaja a otros países como China o Rusia, sino que al contrario, y que lo que ellos están intentando hacer con esta legislación, o lo que por lo menos están intentando mejorar, es la protección de su propio país. Entonces, dicen que, un poco al contrario, que parece que les está funcionando a favor, que más de mostrar sus debilidades, están reforzándose con estas acciones que están tomando.
Sure. Okay, one last question, class.
Yes, some ufologists think that the disclosure is imminent, which implies that the US government or a branch of it already have the answer. What do you think about that? Is it possible? And why do, in that case, Congress spend a lot of money on it right now?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that because there's a misperception, a widespread misperception in the UFO community, which is understandable but mistaken. And that is, there are people that think there's some controlling hand and there's some conspiracy and the federal government has got this plan and they're rolling this out and like I'm part of it and other people are puppets in this plan. That's rubbish. Everything that's happened and come to light is because of some activists and troublemakers who have gotten some information and gone to the press, and people in the press who've been willing to work on this, and people in Congress. The government is not got some disclosure plan. Disclosure is not imminent. What you're reading about now in Congress is what's happening. I can tell you that there are senior Pentagon people who do not believe that there's any crashed material, do think that this is all bogus, they think it's rubbish, and much less disclosure. And I'm talking about very, very senior people who have access to a lot of information, and they're saying in some cases, the people on the Hill, what are you talking about? And show us the evidence, and they're mystified still. So the UFO community, of which I'm a part, I guess, but we have a tendency to see and hear one side of the story in our own stuff, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories because the government has lied and concealed information and all of those things. And conspiracy theories grow in darkness, right? But to the best of my knowledge, the federal government is not in charge or running, doesn't have any big plan, and disclosure is not imminent. If it does happen, it'll be the result of the efforts of people in Congress right now, and people are taking action, and small number of people who may have this information if they come forward.
What about that 23-minute film Elizondo's talking about the high? Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Never mind.
La pregunta que le hizo Blas al señor Mellon tenía que ver con la perspectiva desde el punto de vista de la ufología. Lo que se está preguntando es si estamos ante lo que se llama disclosure inminente, una revelación inminente, y si sería posible, y si lo es, ¿por qué el gobierno de los Estados Unidos ha empleado tanto dinero en esta legislación de amnistía? A lo que el señor Mellon responde que se suele tener una tendencia equivocada de lo que pueden ser los ovnis o los UAPs, y que el gobierno federal tiene un plan, y ese plan no incluye una disclosure inminente, no es parte de lo que ellos tienen pensado. Entonces, también dice que generalmente desde el punto de vista de la ufología, muchas veces hay distintas teorías, y si hay personas que llevan esas teorías a la prensa y que luego se popularizan. También está diciendo que incluso hay hay altos cargos del Pentágono que siguen pensando, que deniegan que no hay ninguna nave espacial que se haya estrellado, deniegan todo este tipo de informaciones, y que no lo quieren admitir. Por lo tanto, porque no hay evidencia, para ellos no hay evidencia que se pueda demostrarle. Desde el punto de vista de la ufología, de la cual es parte, el señor Mellon dice que tendemos a ver la historia también desde otros puntos de vista, también incluyendo algunas teorías conspiratorias, pero definitivamente concluye que desde el gobierno federal no se tiene en mente una disclosure, y que si ocurre finalmente será gracias al interés que hayan dedicado las personas del Congreso en el asunto.
I'd like to add to that just a little bit and say, this is very strange for me because I have a foot in two completely different worlds. And the people in those two different worlds see this issue entirely differently. And they talk right past each other. And I go to meetings with people who have, a salad all over their chest, and, they're running all these secret programs at the Air Force, all stuff, and they look at me like I'm crazy, like I have a third eye in my head. And I talk to other people who are deep insiders, who have had access to classified programs for decades and are very, very credible people who are telling me things that sound very credible that are completely opposed. So I think the good news is that hopefully we're going to get the truth and get to the bottom line finally because of what Congress is doing.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Para finalizar, lo que quiero añadir es que él es un poco extraño todo esto para él, pero lo que es extraño es que comparte desde hace mucho tiempo, tiene dos puntos de vista de dos tipos de pensamientos. Uno es aquellos que, como él dice, tienen rastros de comida en la ropa y hablan de secretismo y de proyectos misteriosos, y cuando él habla con ellos le mira como si tuviese un tercer ojo en la cabeza, como si fuese alguna especie de extraterrestre. Y luego está en contacto con el otro grupo que es completamente lo opuesto, pero considera que si conseguimos un poco más de colaboración y que estos dos grupos colaboren, saldrá adelante y podemos tener nuevos descubrimientos en el asunto y en el campo.
Y con esto damos, no, lo siento, no tenemos tiempo. Damos por terminada esta rueda de prensa. Le agradezco mucho su interés a los periodistas, así como a las personas que nos miran por internet.